I would like to welcome everybody to this Equilibrium Network event, which is being held as part of the Diversity Project. This one is called Facilitating Freedom for All, Building Cities for the Next Generation. Before we start, I would like to let everyone know that this event is being recorded with a view to being shared with a wider audience. It will join our previous events, which are called The Power of Communication, Women in City Making, and Valuing Balance, which can all be found on the EQN website. My name is Magali Thompson, and I am an architect working at Great Ormond Street Hospital on a Healthy Hospital Street project. I'm also one of the steering group members of the Equilibrium Group network. Our focus is on gender diversity. Our purpose is to enable women to have equal influence in the design and delivery of the built environment. We are a group of women and men with a passion for equality and a wealth of expertise and experience in creating our cities. We were conceived in the UK, but our influence is now spreading internationally through events like this. It's really exciting to be making far-reaching contacts and connections. EQN is one of the core members of the Diversity Consortium that is delivering a project funded by the EU Horizon 2020 contract. Today's event forms part of this initiative. The consortium comprises 26 members from academia and public life, including 5 European cities that you can see here, which are being used as pilot studies to explore initiatives that release the power of diversity and social inclusion as a means for reducing air pollution. Within the overall programme of diversity, we launched a special pan-European contest for young people as today's change agents and citizens of the future. This contest was the place and time for younger generations to share their ideas and dreams on how to make cities sustainable and inclusive for them. I was privileged to be one of the judges for this competition. The submissions were extraordinary in terms of the depth of thought and analysis that had gone into them and the wonderful proposals they were putting forward. National winners have already been announced, and the overall winners will be announced on Monday, the 9th of October, at an event in Brussels. The focus on the competition was on diversity, inclusion, and listening to a younger generation, which brings me to today's event. I'm very excited to be chairing today as it is a subject very close to my heart. My attention is always drawn to messages about cash-strapped municipalities who are neglecting playgrounds, headlines in the news describing how ball games have been classified as antisocial behaviour by property managers and no ball games signs are being erected. A recent report by Play England states that almost 40% of parents felt that their neighbours disapprove of children playing outside. Stopping children, aged as young as 3 years old, using space to have fun on bikes, trikes and roller skates, as well as play with balls or just hang out with friends. This continues as children become teenagers, which was highlighted in one of our previous talks, for example, with Make Space for Girls, who focus on the lack of provision in parks for teenage girls. Globally, about 25% of the world is under 15 years of age, and yet children have little or no voice. We know that car-dependent neighbourhoods deprive children of opportunities essential for their health and well-being. They miss out on physical activity, unstructured play, social interaction, and developing social networks. In addition, traffic noise and air pollution expose them to a wide range of environmental and health problems. I'm delighted to say that we have 4 wonderful panelists today who are experts in this area and who will be speaking about their research as well as providing case studies to illustrate positive and successful examples of cities around the world which are welcoming and inclusive to all ages. I will introduce each one before they speak and ask that you use the Q&A function to post any questions you may have. We will try and answer as many questions as possible at the Q&A session after the last speaker. We will be starting today with Tim Gill. Tim Gill is a global advocate for children's outdoor play and mobility, and an independent scholar, writer, and consultant based in London. He is the author of Urban Playground, How Child-Friendly Planning and Design Can Save Cities, and No Fear, Growing Up in a Risk-Averse Society, which was described in the New York Times as a handbook for the movement for freer, riskier play. A UK Design Council ambassador and Churchill Fellow, Tim holds degrees in philosophy and psychology from Oxford and London universities, and an honorary doctorate in education from Edge Hill University. Over to you, Tim.
I'm very happy to be here. I'm happy that you can hear me. It's nice to see some familiar names in the participants. I've been flying the flag for children's everyday freedoms for almost 30 years, so it's also a topic that's dear to my heart. So I'm going to be mainly sharing the sort of key messages from my book, Urban Playground, and looking at this idea of child-friendly urban planning. What is it? Why does it matter? And how can we implement it? And when we're thinking about children's lives today, one good place to start is to think about our own childhoods and how childhood's been changing over the generations. And my next slide helps to do that, I think. It shows you what you might call the roaming range or the home territory of 4 children. They're all 8 years old, but they're in 4 generations of the same family who all lived in the same city. So the big blob that you can see that takes up most of the map, that's the roaming range or the home territory of the great-grandfather in his family. He could travel 10 kilometers across the city on his own at the age of 8. And you can see the 2 smaller circles. And then take a look at the yellow dot. That's the roaming range of the son in this family at the age of 8. He's actually allowed to go to the end of his street. So this beautifully encapsulates what I call the shrinking horizons of childhood. And it's one of the most important and underexplored changes, I think, in children's lives. And it's happening pretty much everywhere. And one of the key reasons, not the only reason, but probably the most important reason for this change is the human habitats, the built environment, the neighborhoods that children are growing up in. But this map also speaks to children's appetite for experience. Children want to gradually expand their horizons and find out how the world works. And when we think about our standard offer to children to satisfy this appetite for experience, we come up with something like this. Okay, that's a particularly poor example, but if there's one message I want you to take away from this talk, is that this model, the child reservation model, is completely the wrong approach to expanding children's spatial lives. So I'm going to talk a bit more about what I think child-friendly planning is. That's a good example of what it isn't. I'm going to share a case study from one city and a few ideas about making it happen. So this diagram encapsulates the framework for child-friendly urban planning, which has 2 dimensions. On one dimension, you're looking for neighborhoods and places that have a lot of choice of things to do. Places to play, to do sport, have contact with nature, to see friends. But that is not enough. We also need places to support children's mobility, places where it's easy for children to get around on foot or by bike. And it's only where you have both high levels of mobility and a lot of choice and a variety of spaces and places to go that you're in that child-friendly quadrant. So what does this look like? I'm going to take an example of one neighborhood that I suggest you could call the ultimate child-friendly neighborhood. And it's an eco-suburb of Vauban in Freiburg, well known amongst urbanists. You can see an image of it there. It's a district of about 6,000 inhabitants. It's apartment living. But the key thing that marks Vauban out, I think, is that it's, to all intents and purposes, a car-free neighborhood. You can own a car, but very few households do. And if you do, you have to park your car on a peripheral car park. So as a result, the streets and the spaces between the buildings are all available for public use. And one of the interesting things about Vauban is it's not really you don't see very many playgrounds in the district. You see a lot of play features, but they're woven into the green space, as you can see here. The streets themselves are very lively. They're always, the 2 visits that I've spent at the district, I've always seen lots of people out and about. Children of different ages, with and without their parents. And you can see here on the left, one of the car parks that I mentioned, and on the right, great public transport, which of course reduces the need for families to own or use cars in the first place. So in my book, I pull together this idea in a set of indicators. I'm not going to read those out to you, but they're strategic indicators that help to figure out whether or not a place is child-friendly. And you can see their first-person statements from the point of view of children. And again, this is really trying to bring out the freedom and mobility and how that matters and marks out a child-friendly place. So, why does this idea matter? Well, in my book, I visited and studied about a dozen cities, and I asked city leaders why they were investing in child-friendly planning and design. So these are all cities that took this vision seriously. And this Venn diagram shows you the answers that city leaders gave me. So there's a group of cities that are indeed strongly focused on children's rights, children's health, and children's well-being. But then there's a second group of cities that are primarily focused on sustainability and community. And they've grasped the idea that in essence, what does a child-friendly neighborhood look like? It's compact, it's green, it's easy to get around without a car. So it looks a lot like a sustainable neighborhood. And then there's a third group of cities that are all have quite hard-nosed economic interests in making the city more attractive to families, because in that way they'll secure the long-term future of their city. So the case study that I'm going to share with you, in fact, is an example of a city that took that hard-nosed economic point of view. And this is Rotterdam. And it's the city that's probably devoted more time and money to making its built form more child-friendly than any other city on Earth. It spent tens of millions of euros on 3 programs over a 12-year period that have all been quite strategically carried out and targeted and evaluated. So just to give you a bit of a flavour of what Rotterdam's done, this map is of one district, and this is unlike Vauban. This is an existing 19th century neighbourhood just outside the city centre. And the map shows you how a whole set of interventions were made in this disadvantaged area with different collaborators and partners focusing on schoolyards, playgrounds, parks, sports facilities, and also improving the streetscape. And the impact on this neighborhood was measured. So you can see this picture captures a rather funky piece of traffic calming that was part of the neighborhood plan. One of the interesting things about Rotterdam is that it's also brought in policies to bake in a neighborhood scale approach. So the policies use GIS and spatial analyses in a neighborhood by neighborhood process that helps planners and partners figure out where the barriers to children's play and mobility are, where there might be gaps and how those gaps can be filled. So you've got policy supporting the program. So my last section is just going to look a little bit at making this all happen. And I've already mentioned one point about neighborhoods. I want to just mention also the importance of people and this idea of children as a unifying lens. So the point about neighborhoods is that children and families don't live in cities, they live in neighborhoods. Okay, so the neighborhood must be the unit of analysis. And that's what this image captures. It's figuring out where are the spaces, the public spaces, the play spaces, what are the connections and links between them and schools and other important facilities in the neighborhood, and how can that web of spaces and routes be improved. Turning to people and policies, one of the most consistent findings from my study was that the cities that were getting things done were cities where there was a municipal official who had a kind of catalyst role, who was the hub in the middle of a set of spokes that connected transport and planning, that enabled effective involvement, that had that focus on the residential neighborhood, that secured investment in both spaces and mobility, and that carried out effective evaluation. So really, that is it's a, I think, very consistent finding. The cities that were doing the most and had the most impact had this hub and spoke model. And my final message about implementation is really about the power of what's sometimes called a children's lens. You can see here a quote from the former mayor of Bogota, Enrique Peñalosa, well-known advocate and change maker, and he talks about children being an indicator species. I really like that image and this idea that, you know, if you see, as I saw in Vauban, children of different ages with and without their parents being active and visible in their neighborhood, it's a sign of the health of that human habitat, in the same way that if you see salmon swimming up a river, it's a sign of the health of that habitat. So the message I want to leave you with is that if you are not thinking about and talking about children, then you are missing out on perhaps the most powerful way to build consensus about creating more sustainable, healthy, and equitable places. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. That was great. I always really love that diagram of the shrinking horizons within the generation of the family. That was really, really good. So moving on now, I'm going to introduce Ines Novella. Ines has a master's in architecture and in equal opportunities, researcher and coordinator at the UNESCO Chair on Gender Equality Policies in Science, Technology and Innovation. Ines is an associate lecturer of urban planning at Universitat Politécnica de Valencia. Her research focuses on gender-responsive spatial planning and design, and on structural change and gender policies in STEM institutions. She was part of the multidisciplinary technical office in charge of developing the master plan for Madrid Nuevo Norte redevelopment project, and she collaborates in several actions to keep the gender-sensitive approach of the project during its development phase. Author and co-author of different toolkits, articles and book chapters on gender in spatial planning, in charge of designing and implementing a number of training courses on gender in STEM fields, and her participatory action research with women on safety in public space was selected for the Spanish Pavilion in the 2018 Venice Biennale of Architecture. So it's, yeah, over to you, Ines. Thank you.
Thank you, Magali, and hello, everybody. Good evening. Let's see if I can control the presentation. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So today I wanted to focus in teenagers, which is another a group of population very sensitive to the way we plan and design and manage built environments. And I would like to focus in one participation process that we had in Madrid last year in one of the neighborhoods that is going under development in the north part of the city of Madrid. I did this work as part of my task as a researcher in the UNESCO chair, but I always try to learn from this consultancy or research for my teaching in Valencia. That's where I wanted to include this slide here. And very quickly, to just put some context in the way we approach this work, public engagement or working with people for addressing urban planning or urban design, it's part of the group of activities that we do within the UNESCO chair. Some of them are very, very common within the university, but some others are not really very common in academia. Let's say. For example, the work that I would like to talk about and share with you today, it's for us typical consultancy work or technical assistance to other professionals or entities. So we apply this kind of activity to urban planning and transportation in this case. But it's very important for me to also explain that the work that we do comes and has an impact in the research that we do. We use previous research in the work we do. We also are very committed to use it and include this in the trainings and education programs that we have with regular students, but also with professionals. And obviously, it's also it's an important part of our advocacy work. So these kind of activities for us are very multitask, and they have lots of dimensions that we consider are these kind of activities are very important. So today I would like to talk about Madrid Nuevo Norte. It's one of Europe's most important urban redevelopment projects in the north part of Madrid. It's huge. It will have an impact. It has already an impact at a national and regional scale, of course, at the urban scale. It is very important to mention that it is such a complicated project. It's very polemic project. It's a very expensive, very technically complex project that it is necessary to go to a public-private partnership, and this has been a very positive issue sometimes, even for public participation. And this project is basically filling a void that was created by railway infrastructures and some industrial areas that are not used anymore, etc. It's a very typical urban redevelopment project in European cities. The model that is proposed, it's a typical sustainable city model based on proximity, mix of uses, etc. But what it's very key in this case is that the developer, which is a private company, it keeps, at least so far, a very important, big, and key public engagement department within the whole structure of the company. The stage is now the urban design project, the planning stage. I mean, at the level of the master plan, it's finished and approved. So the work that I am sharing today is focused in the second stage of development, which is the design of the public space, what we call in Spain proyectos de urbanización, which is similar to the urban design projects. We will in the first neighborhood to be developed is the one you have here in red. The school we were working with is here. So this was the first neighborhood to be developed because it's the smallest one, the most the simplest one, because it's all the land belongs to the company. So it was the easiest one in terms of management. It's also important to mention that the collaboration, the participation of teenagers and children during the previous planning stage was very important. So this was not the first time that the company and myself were working with young people and kids. So they were already kind of used to this kind of activities. And for you to see, this is like a bit like the structure of the work. We are really at the very beginning of the process, so we are very far from the start of the works. These processes of consultation or participation are aiming at producing information and supporting decision making to the urban design project here. So here is where I am focusing today. So this kind of projects, they have lots of activities to do. They look at many different things. Some are just infrastructure, some others are more public relevant. So what we choose, and the company choose these 5 actions to be included within the consultation process. They were the spaces under 3 of the new bridges, how they could be used, how they could be designed. The same for the new footbridge, how we could design and use the new green areas, how to design the bike lane, and in general, cycling infrastructure, and the general design of the streets, including sidewalks, bus stops, furniture, lighting, etc. Here you have the bridges, the 3 new bridges, the bridge, the 3 new green areas, and this street, which is the only street that is being developed in this little neighborhood, where the bike line will be, and we have to decide how is the street section and its design. So initially we were approaching 3 focus groups: adult women, teenage girls, and mothers caring for children. But because of timing, because of logistics, we could only work with adult women and teenagers, but we had to include boys because it was the only way we could gather a group. And we took it as an opportunity to compare reactions of boys and girls at the teenage stage to the relevant issues that we wanted to talk about and how they approach this kind of projects. So after choosing the focus group, we also select or list the relevant issues from gender perspective, and obviously regarding the scale and the scope of the urban design project we were dealing with. For example, in the case of teenagers, we thought it was very important to talk about everyday light mobility, focus on cycling, safety perception, the quality of public spaces near the school, specific needs of teenage population, and how leisure and sports facilities are more or less undertake within this little area of work. And we could check that these all relevant issues could be interesting for the design of the streets, the bike lane, etc., etc. After this, we kind of designed how we wanted to proceed, and we used a specific methodology for one of the 4 action or topics that we wanted to address, and use different tools within this methodology. For example, if we wanted to ask about issues regarding the spaces under the bridges, we use mostly future scenarios methodology, and we use a collective poster on the wall, identifying sex through stick colors, for example. You have here the different main methodologies we use, the wall, the individual booklet, and I think this picture is not right, but they were using here like virtual prototypes to decide how green areas could work. So a selection of some findings after this work with the teenagers from this school. For example, we found that girls stay closer to the school. For example, an important part of the girls, they decided to stay when they have like a sort of break within the school hours. They are old enough to have they are allowed to go outside the school if they want for like a short break. So when we ask about this, we realize that boys tend to go farther and they explore more than girls. Girls are more concentrated in very close to the school, and always near and looking at the main entrance of the school, which is here in the corner. So they move differently. Regarding bikes, for example, and their regular use of bikes, no girl uses a bike on a daily basis. For example, if we look at the occasional use of cycling, we see that among girls is mostly associated to sports, not leisure, while boys is equally associated with both sports and leisure. So they have a different use of bikes. When we ask, for example, which conditions, physical or not physical, could motivate them to use daily bikes, we found that special conditions of cycling infrastructure, for example, bike lanes, are more important for boys than for girls. So if we want to motivate girls to use the bike every day, we need to complement urban design with other soft initiatives, like, for example, education, awareness raising, etc. So it's more complicated to motivate girls to use the bike. Then when we ask them about the spaces under the bridge, against all odds, we found that spaces designed for urban sports, like, for example, skating or rolling, etc., were the least appreciated by teenagers, including boys. So this was something that was really a finding for us, because they thought that designing a sort of skate park or something under one of the bridges could be a good idea. We found, at least for this group of teenagers, it was not this way. And for example, we found here you have the preferences, boys here, girls on the right. We found that, for example, boys like very much childish spaces. You see here, like the green one. They like very much like sort of playgrounds, even if they were designed for babies. Like this case here in this future scenario or virtual image that we found. While girls, for example, are really like beautiful green areas, like landscape design, etc., are very popular among girls. And which is very, very typical is girls prefer spaces that are like complemented with little construction, little boxes with a cafe, a little shop, station space, activities without a smaller scale, like a box under the space, under the bridge. And for example, another finding was that the smallest gender gap was found in examples that were designed as a multifunctional spaces, self-managed, and also with very little initial design, so they could really understand the space like something they could create, and without without many conditions in terms of physical design. Just to finish, it's something that we really recommend, and we have learned from that from other projects, that we always it's very, I think, very strategic to finish this kind of participative processes with key recommendations, and we always in our reports include a sort of final chapter that gathers design recommendations specifically addressing technical departments, engineers, architects, planners, and these recommendations are not general ones, but really focusing and adjust to the scale and scope of the project that we are working with. Because otherwise it's very difficult for planners, architects, or engineers to really incorporate the information that we are providing. So I think it's really worth. And I finish with this. We also found that there were significant gender differences in the behavior of the adolescents during the work with them. Boys show much more initiative and a greater capacity to show their ideas than girls. So we also need to think about this when we design the activity itself, in order to promote equality and real to give the floor to girls, because they really have problems to express themselves and their ideas, etc. So thank you very much. You have all this toolkit also about this project, and my address and our websites if you want to contact us or get more information about this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ines. That was great. Really interesting to see such differences in terms of the analysis on gender there. And it reminded me a bit of Tim's diagram, but I don't know if that was for girls or boys, but it's just interesting to see such a difference in terms of the girls and the boys roaming. Thank you. So we're going to move on now to Simeon Shtubunayev. Simeon is an interdisciplinary researcher in the built environment working at Social Life. Their PhD project at Birmingham City University explores how young people engage in the planning of future smart cities. He was a principal investigator on the AHRC-funded project Are You Game for Climate Action, developing the board game Climania, with young people focusing on the role of the built environment in climate change. Simeon was selected as the Royal Institute for British Architects Rising Star in 2021 and the Royal Town Planning Institute Young Planner of the Year 2022. He chairs the Cultural Infrastructure and Investment Working Group, part of the YMCA Cultural Leadership Board. So yeah, Simeon, when you're ready, thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. And this is really, really interesting. I'm going to keep the theme of teenagers and young adults following Ines. And let's see if this is going to change. Haha. So I took a full cue from the title of this lecture, and I went with this whole theme of freedoms. And I was really thinking, well, yeah, we are in the precipice of a new transition, of a new change in our economy, even though it might not be necessarily visible in a lot of the political statements that are coming out recently. But we need to transition into an economy where climate and biodiversity are embedded into it. And I was thinking at a similar time in the US, almost a century ago, there was a different economic transition happening, and the famous Roosevelt speech of the Four Freedoms, which underpin the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, were the freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. And I really thought, what does it mean? That do I actually touch on any of these topics in my own work or not? And I just thought it would be a really interesting prism to think, if we are facilitating freedoms, what type of freedoms are we actually facilitating, and for who? So, oh, there we go. So I'm gonna go through them, and I was just gonna talk a bit about the projects that I think kind of relate to some of those topics, but obviously completely open to the discussions after that to tell me, Simon, this was a very stupid idea. Why are you doing this? So I think the freedom of speech and expression is quite a common commonly understood freedom. But actually, if you look at the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, it's really interesting that the definition is quite open. So everybody has the freedom to seek, receive, impart information, ideas of all kinds. And this comes across in a lot of my research with teenagers, especially around the access of information and access of information about urban planning, about architecture, about their own neighborhood, and anything like that. So to kind of combat this, you already mentioned this project. We developed a board game on one of those topics based on a neighborhood in the UK. Let me just, oh, these two slides need to be switched, but anyway, based on a neighborhood in the UK. It was part of COP26 HRC grants, and it was called Are You Game for Climate Action, where we worked with 13 young people between 14 and 18 years of age in a neighborhood in Birmingham where I live called Balsall Heath. And there was a co-design process, so we kind of I was there to facilitate the design and sort of the communication, and my colleague Claudia Carter was there to facilitate the sort of the scientific side. And we worked with a lot of partners, but really it was 13 neighbors, I guess. They do live in the same area as me, who kind of led on this. And it was really about how would we communicate climate change and the issues around climate change in the built environment at a neighborhood level. And the topic that they kind of came up with was really around retrofits. It was really around the topic of how do we kind of change our built environment in a more efficient way. And I put the kind of like the Teddy Roosevelt bit came in from the fact that a lot of the young people were really interested in retrofit, not necessarily because they cared that much about climate change. Well, obviously they did, but they didn't care that much. They just thought it was a really, really good career path. They were really, really interested in kind of understanding how can they become, how can they become kind of involved in that profession. So we went through a kind of a iterative process. The idea was that play is a tool of engaging young people and other community members. We used design thinking and co-production to create the game, and we did that over 7 2-hour workshops. So it was quite a short project. It was quite a low budget project as well. It was up to 10K. We worked with a lot of different academics. We had expert visits from different architects and planners who worked with the young people, and we used a lot of existing literature. So we didn't necessarily reinvent that. The focus was really to kind of communicate that in a better way. And we used the LETI, the London Energy Transition Institute retrofit guide quite a lot, because it was quite a nice way to communicate even to 14-year-olds. And we had a lot of explorations in the local area. So before we kind of narrowed down to retrofit, the idea really was, what do people care about in their local area? And we had a lot of different explorations about the building the state of the buildings, the urban environment. And then they did a little of peer research, asking their families about what the issues are they care about. And then we kind of started prototyping ideas. This is where we kind of narrowed down to the idea of retrofit. We had sort of a bit of a deliberative democracy process where we went through a lot of different iterations, a lot of voting between until we kind of reached an unanimous consensus about the topic and the type of game that we want to develop. And then we sort of started doing a lot of playing, testing, refining, a lot of tools borrowed from game design, where you start creating prototypes, you go back into the community, test them, and you come back. And the final result, if I managed to, yeah, the final result was a game which had a lot of different components, but the idea was that you have your own house, you move to the board, collect a lot of different retrofit cards by answering questions that you're not necessarily familiar with, but about retrofit and climate change. And then you have to kind of reach the center and retrofit your house. And really the idea was that through the play, you kind of learn a lot of different elements, you learn a lot of different ideas, you learn a lot of knowledge that you might otherwise be quite dry and quite boring to access. The game is free to download for everybody. It's online, it's an HRC product, so it's a print and play game, and anybody can print it in their homes. So do go out and Google it. But what was really, really interesting to kind of see how gaming can be an effective way of engaging young people was the fact that it really kind of provided them with that opportunity to express themselves, to have a lot of different opportunities to be creative. It moved from a very didactic learning way that maybe we use a lot in higher education or secondary education, to more of an active experimentation and reflection. So we constantly refine what we're doing. It situated the problem of climate change into a very personal issue. And as I said, a lot of the young people really cared about the local area, about their future careers. And we live, my neighborhood is quite a poor Victorian housing stock. So really, really, it was something that was very dear to them. We had the opportunity to provide quick expert advice, and I think it was really, really important to sort of be able to have experts on the side that could quickly come and answer questions that maybe even I or my colleague Claudia wouldn't able to answer. And I think the final one is like just knowing when to be a facilitator and when to be an expert and when to be just quiet. And I think when you talk about freedom of speech, I think quite often maybe we don't necessarily talk about the fact that at least in the projects I've worked in, views of young people in young adults quite often get presumed that they're quite homogenous, to get presumed that they're quite, you've asked 10 young people and therefore you know everything about the area from that perspective. So I think, just being able to give the stage to that demographic helps a lot. I don't know how I'm doing with time, by the way. And I think in terms of environmental concerns and just ethics and just generally engaging that demographic, I think having clear outputs and demonstrating impact is incredibly important. I think if you're starting to get on a project with that demographic and you don't know what you're actually going to do by the end of it, it doesn't have to be a defined output, but it needs to be something tangible that they can get a head around and they can see that there will be some life after the project. And yeah, not shying away from complicated topics. Very quickly, you understand that that demographic, especially teenagers, are quite able to understand complicated topics. And I think just linked to this, sorry, it's been a long day, I've been talking all day, is linked to this project, the idea of freedom of worship. Actually, the mosque where we live became quite a big part of the afterlife of this project. So all of the young people that we worked with were, well, a few of them were refugees, but most of them were kind of either first or second generation immigrants. So the mosque became this kind of part of the afterlife of the project, which was simultaneously we were developing a kind of a community group, which was all about retrofitting, and at the moment has actually managed to acquire from Birmingham City Council money for around 500 residential properties to be retrofitted. So just kind of being able to open up the conversation, not just to young people, but to introduce others. So you can see this is some of the elders in the community kind of testing the game, and then being able to really embed the afterlives of the project within the local community, regardless of the type of community, I think is really, really important. So I was just trying to think how would that change if we didn't if we kind of stuck to that idea of you know, we've got the money, the funding, because a lot of this was voluntary after the project, after we actually got the HRC grant and everything, you know, concluded. If we just took the idea that, you know, this is something that we put out there and we go to conferences and just share it, and, you know, we never actually go back to the neighborhood and actually do a bit of work with different communities. And here I'm just going to open it to a few other projects which I'm currently writing up. The freedom from want is something that is coming across a lot with my work with young adults. In the last 4 years since COVID, I've been running a project in Birmingham where I've been asking young adults between 18 to 25 years of age about the housing conditions and how and what type of housing they would like to live in. And there is some really interesting data that's coming up, and some of the data that is really coming up is also that people don't really care about COVID anymore. But the persistent kind of issues that you can see in some of the quotes here about housing quality, the type of housing that's being built, the type of security, housing security that people have at that age range is really, really striking. And there is a consistent reporting of issues such as maintaining physical and mental health, ability to work from home, even though COVID's gone away. You know, a lot of people still work from home in that age group. Suitable external space is a big issue. Indoor conditions and kind of damaged social relationships. These are sort of the topics that continue to be issues about that demographic occupying homes within Birmingham in the last 4 years. So it's really interesting that all of those did not go down, and why it's important is that that demographic kind of going through the pandemic experience will become the future house buyers in sadly 5 to 10 years in the UK, because the average age is 33 years of age. But I just thought it was really, really interesting to think about the idea that even though we have a universal human right of freedom from want, you know, you have to have good housing conditions, we're still kind of locking in a lot of substandard housing, which we already know that the future buyers would not necessarily want to engage with because it's not necessarily what they're looking for. And then finally, the idea of freedom from fear, about safety in cities. And this is just a little snippet from some of the topics that are coming out from my PhD, but safe city and safety was either the top or the top 3 issues for each of the demographics that each of the young people between 15 to 19 years of age that I spoke in those 4 areas. So in Birmingham, Manchester, Sofia, and Valencia. And I think safety, it always tops the issues when we talk about what type of urban environment young people would like. And quite often I've noticed, and I'm currently working a project in London as a sort of social researcher, some of the feedback is coming back around safety about young people, and the solution is CCTV. And I think CCTV could be a solution in certain cases, but good urban design could solve a lot of those issues much better. And I'm running perfectly to time. This is fantastic. And I think the final thing, which I just wanted to put down to everybody to talk about, is this changing? Oh, there we go. It's just the idea about freedoms, but also rights and obligations. And I think from the African Youth Charter, Article 26 of the African Youth Charter is really, really interesting, because most of the youth charters are kind of, you know, universal right declarations of rights and freedoms, give you all your rights and all your freedoms, but very rarely give you all the responsibilities that you should have as a citizen, or in this case, as a young person. And even though I might not agree with some of them, and even though I think that sexual orientation is glaringly lacking out of some of their statements, it's really, really interesting to see that the charter actually puts down a list of very comprehensive responsibilities that young people have to have to the community and to their society. And I think quite often we talk about facilitating freedoms, but we also forget to sort of think about, well, how do we then maintain and manage those individual and collective responsibilities, and who actually has that role within the community to be a custodian and sort of disseminate some of those issues. And I think that's me.
Great, Thanks, Simeon. Really interesting to hear you talk about freedom, maybe in a different way as opposed to just looking at it in terms of mobility, and also that reference there to the African Youth Charter and thinking about responsibility as well as rights. Yeah, and I really like that. That's brilliant. Thank you. So now we're going to move on to Yoni Babocci. So Yoni is an architect, planner, and all-round urban enthusiast. He is the founder of Leia, which is a spatial orchestration platform with global data coverage, which empowers teams to govern through tactics and patterns while leveraging machine learning and artificial intelligence. He has previously served as a general director of planning and urban development for the city of Tirana and the director of Atelier Albania, a structure of the Albanian government dealing with national and regional strategic planning. Yoni has executed planning, design, and development projects at different scales at the national, regional, and local levels. He consults on urbanism and planning for various cultural and multilateral institutions. Yoni holds a Bachelor of Arts in Architecture from the University of Toronto and a Master of Science degree in Cities from the London School of Economics. Go ahead, Yoni. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Magali. I think that was a very long introduction, so I apologize for people having to bear through the name. I'm happy to share a bit of the story and of the work that we accomplished in Tirana. Hopefully, it resonates with some of the fantastic issues that have been raised by Tim, by Ines, and by Simeon in the past hour or so. Very interesting presentations. I think they complement the story that I want to tell about Tirana very well. I'm going to move the slide here, trying to at least. And basically, the idea is to give you just a brief taste of the work in Tirana through two main projects. I think the first and most singular project that we did in our work in Tirana was a playground. So I think it's very relevant to talk about it. But initially, just a couple of slides to give you to locate Albania on a map. Sometimes it's helpful, and also to give you just a few slides which illustrate the growth of Tirana in the past 20, 30 years. So this is Tirana in 1989, and then this is Tirana in 1999, 10 years later. And then here you see Tirana in 2009. And then ultimately, this is Tirana a couple of years ago. So you can see the huge growth the city had, informal, a lot of it unplanned, little concern for children, youth, or any kind of sort of planning model. The population quadrupled in just 25 years. So it went from 200,000 to 800,000. The number of cars went from 200, that was it, just cars for most of the political cadre, to 200,000. So that grew by a factor of 1,000. You can imagine the kind of pressure on infrastructure. And that was a city that we started to work with almost 10 years ago now. And again, one of the main models that the mayor chose, a mayor that I think was very passionate about the issues of how can we build a more equitable city, a city which was more focused towards children, was to start with a big playground designed by Bowles and Wilson in one of the main parks of Tirana. And funny enough, this playground became a huge national issue. So it even made the news at RT in Russian television, where there was this big protest in Albania between the president and the opposition party and the prime minister and the mayor. And for 3 months, everyone could only hear about the design of this playground, whether trees were being cut, whether there would be a big tower built there. And for a lot of us at City Hall who were working at let's say the bureaucratic level, not the political level, where the fight was happening, it became fairly difficult. So we had our doubts. Should we actually build this playground? There's so much pressure in the media, in the public, in politics. Should we go ahead with it? And ultimately, I remember this meeting with the mayor and staff where he said, sometimes, I mean, we've had a lot of time for consultation. We've talked about it for quite a bit. And now it's time for action. So we have to get the courage out and sort of actually go and do it. And so it was a very, very successful project, which is still full of children today. But I think it also illustrated the potential and the force of children and youth as political tranquilizers or pacifiers in a way. So if you're dealing with a project which has children and young people at its sort of core, it's very, very difficult for any sort of and there we go. We have one of the children here. My daughter is saying hi in this moment, agitating in the workshop. So I think that when you have children and young people at the center of projects, it's very easy to have a very strong argument to push them through politically and in the public sort of in the public realm. I think it makes it removes all the animosity and the conflict that often, especially in Albania, but I think now internationally, rules politics. And it doesn't matter if the project is good or bad. If it's sort of something that people can discuss and politicize, it becomes the topic of the day. But that big singular project actually gave the mayor so much power. It gave him trust because people thought, okay, he promised to deliver a playground with no coffee shops, no towers, no development, and he actually did. And at the same time, it was a sort of a very successful project. So we then took that as sort of one example and tried to like keep growing it in an urban acupuncture sort of way, finding spots all around Tirana and trying to transform them into small playgrounds. A lot of community design was happening here where the community was being consulted. What is the best place that you think a sitting place should go to? Where do you need some more shade? And this would be fairly quick turnaround projects. They would leverage existing space, which was often either undeveloped or run down or overwrought with cars, and then try and transform it into public-friendly small squares, basically taking that singular big playground at the center of the park and then trying to spread it around the city in sort of small bits and pieces. And I think it worked fairly well because I think it continued that initial focus on children as the centerpiece of building an equitable and accessible city. And then briefly, the second project I want to talk about is again a signature project. Just to mention, so basically the number of the number of playgrounds grew. We arrived at 100 playgrounds in 100 months by the end of the second mandate after 8 years of the mayor working in Tirana, and hopefully that number will grow to 150 while he's on his third mandate, which he got reelected in last March. The second, and then of course taking that as a sort of as an initial cue, we try to do something similar with schools, where again, how can we build spaces which are friendly to access, are easy to go to, but they also serve as centerpieces of the community. We realized in Albania that because of the quadrupling of the population, the infrastructure, the educational infrastructure, as well as any other infrastructure, hadn't really kept up. We needed 20 new schools built to just meet current demand. And that meant not having children study in different shifts and so on. So we had this big program of building these new schools. But again, the idea was, how can we build them as community centers? So how can we design them from the ground up, not just as places where you go for 4 hours and learn, but as places that can be used for 18 or 16 or even 24 hours in different functions as for the community. Sports fields, chess clubs, open air cinemas, playgrounds or parks that are open to the community after hours and so on. And it was a fairly successful project with more than 20 new schools built. Again, with this idea of how can we think of schools as cathedrals of a city and build them with this idea of not just being places where people learn, but also places where you can have a lot of stuff happening. The last thing I want to touch upon, I think it also talks about the same idea of children and youth tranquilizing heavy political projects, and that's the Pyramid of Tirana. The Pyramid of Tirana is a very iconic building. You see here a picture from the late 80s when it was finished building. It was actually built as the mausoleum of the dictator, Enver Hoxha. So his body laid in state inside of this building, and students and pupils from all over Albania would come and visit and sort of do the routine around this building, shaped like a pyramid, to visit the body of the dead dictator. And again, this was a very controversial project. So this basically became a rundown ruin in the center of the boulevard of Tirana. where it was very difficult to think what to do with it. The opposition or like different opposing views in the city were like, let's demolish it. It's such a horrible sort of symbol. It reminds us of communism, of dictatorship, of a total lack of rights. Another big chunk of the city was saying, sure, but it has also served as NATO headquarters, as a jazz festival center, as hundreds of different functions in the 90s and in the 2000s. So this building served as a mausoleum for 3 years, and then it had a huge amount of functions in the next 20. And so at some point, the decision was made to demolish it. There was a lot of protest, a big protest movement to try and save it. And it basically, if you visit Tirana 5 or 6 years ago, you would see it in this state. So totally ruined, people sort of having fun with the building, with the facade, but not really having any function and not being able to find the right function to actually nullify the stigma and the fire that this building sort of held within for a lot of people in Albania. So in collaboration with a Dutch architecture studio, we thought, okay, how about we dedicate this place to the young people of Albania? So it will now serve as the headquarters of TUMO. TUMO is an Armenian-born organization which tries to teach children, well, young people from I think 10 to 14 or 16 skills that are useful before they go to university. A bit of programming, robotics, design, music editing, playing instruments, basically all kinds of different stuff where you learn by yourself, but you also learn in a group. So the building was actually finished just a few months ago. It's going to start operating this October as the center place of this TUMO center, as well as other public functions. But again, I mean, it took almost 30 years to actually realize that the best way to remove the stigma of this building was to just say, this is for young people. How can anyone say, let's not have a building for young people? I think it sort of basically totally nullified the opposition against for demolishing this building. So there is an architectural icon. There's some architectural history there. There's quite an interesting itinerary to follow inside to actually remember what happened in the building. But at the same time, I think the big public discourse about what happens with politically sensitive buildings, I think, was resolved by dedicating it to I think young people, to children, to still making it a very interactive building, very playful. You can climb up to the top of it now in a more safe manner. There's a number of elevators as well to help with accessibility. But I think it's an interesting example in Tirana of, again, how can we use in design, in urban design, in urban planning, how can we use younger generations, children and youth, as a force for change, where we not only provide more spaces for them, but at the same time we resolve long-standing issues that grown-ups typically have in cities and in the East. So yeah, again, just a couple of images. This is how it used to look. This is how it looked when work started in the pyramid a bit ago. And then this is how it looks today with this playful sort of areas inside. And hopefully this is how it will look in October with young people and children moving in and being upskilled and sort of getting these soft skills ready for their higher education. Thank you very much, everyone. I thought hopefully I gave you sort of a bit of an intro to some of the work in Tirana, and I think it correlates very well with a lot of the other speakers in terms of really making a very interesting and thank you to the other panelists for that interventions, short, to the point, and very, very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yoni. Fantastic to hear about the scale and ambition of the projects that have been carried out in Tirana. Really exciting. So we're now going to start Q&A. I'm not sure there are any questions. We haven't got that long, but and I'll start off with a question of my own. Just looking at the projects that the case studies in Madrid, Tirana, and Birmingham, I thought it'd be interesting to know what you think were the main barriers in terms of progressing these projects. Was there much opposition? And how important do you think it is to have a sort of champion? I know there was a big champion, for example, in Tirana in terms of the mayor there. Ines, shall I start with you, if that's okay, in terms of that question?
Yeah, there was a lot of opposition from certain political parties, and actually it was not the only, but it was one of the reasons, because of the left side party, local government didn't won in the second election after 4 years. So it was a very powerful project for the good and for the bad. I mean, so, but I think from my point of view, I am not an expert in politics, but from my point of view, one of the key aspects was to be very transparent. I mean, to really give the information, the technical one, objective one, neutral one. And in my case, because I was only focusing on gender issues, it's just to always meet with all associations that were always against the project. I always met them. I agree with them sometimes. Some other times I did not. But communication, good communication and transparency, I think there were key issues in our case regarding gender within this very complicated project.
Yeah, great. Simeon, would you agree? I'm sure in terms of communication and transparency.
I think from my perspective about Birmingham, several years ago we declared a climate emergency, and there was this big task force where all the youth climate strikers were invited to be part of, which came up with a lot of recommendations, a lot of different changes, and then that just ended up nowhere. So I think, yeah, transparency is really important, because in this case, the administrative bit, and a lot of recommendations have come in the city in the past around young people, but the administrative process tends to be used by politicians sometimes as a way to obscure decision making and then to kind of pacify a lot of that demographic, I think. So yeah, definitely transparency has been an issue, because we've been asking about what's going on with all this for quite a while, but our council's bankrupt now, so we might not get answers.
Okay. How about you, Yoni? Any thoughts?
I totally agree. I think that Tim put it very well in the beginning, putting the political sort of I wouldn't call it profit, but let's say the main political person who pushes through a certain project is key. And for sure that transparent in communication is super important. I worked quite a bit with people when I was working in the city, and I think that the key issue was people want to be heard. They don't even, you don't even need to resolve the problem that they might have. You just need to give a good argument why it's one way or another. And they need to be treated with respect and sort of heard and sort of talked with, and that's enough. So often you might totally go the other direction, but if you actually discuss the issues beforehand with the people who might have issues with it, typically they won't be as animals and as conflictual if they have sort of talked with you. So I think that that's one of the key aspects in trying to manage difficult projects. Just listening to people, having like simple one-on-one conversations.
Yeah. And in fact, there's a question now, Yoni, saying the project in Tirana, was it co-designed with the young people? Did young people take some decisions about uses, design, management, etc.?
So all the playgrounds, the smaller playgrounds across the neighborhoods were co-designed. There were teams of what's called the APR, the Agency for Parks and Recreations, who was dealing with these projects. Who actually, again, we believe that especially I think there's two kinds of projects. There's signature projects. They're like the big projects. You can have public consultations there, but unfortunately, often whatever results or whatever discussion is had there is sort of, you're talking about giving like a much larger message. So when I talk about the pyramid or the square, it's difficult to have like a healthy consultation because it's about a big project. It's not about sort of a community project, like a project where someone has buy-in. If we talk about the neighborhood project, that's another story. So I think that when we talk about neighborhood projects, once the vision has been set, it's crucial to have the community involved. And in a lot of the neighborhood designs and implementation as well. I mean, I don't have the pictures here, but we had a lot of cases where during communism, again, Saturday was a day where people would come out and they would voluntarily clean the space around their public buildings. Of course, this stopped happening after the 90s. But when those playgrounds were being built, people from the community came out and helped. You know, they sort of, oh, let's not put the tree here, let's put it a bit farther to the right, because like this is the place where we used to have. So they actually participated also in the implementation or in the construction of the project. Of course, these were smaller projects where this could happen, and this wasn't sort of something organized where everyone came out and helped. But I mean, as a token of illustrating the idea of how can you involve community as much as possible, I think at the end, in smaller projects, community-based projects, the community will actually inhabit and own the project. It will be theirs. So as much consultation and co-design there, it's crucial to ensure that that second level of maintenance and ownership.
Thank you, Yoni. And Tim, last word from you, maybe. I know we're running out of time.
Well, very quickly, I on the topic of kind of co-design and participation, I think it's really crucial. We recognize we've been asking children and young people what they like and what they don't like about cities and neighborhoods for 20, 30, 40 years. Their answers are incredibly consistent. They tell us they like choice and variety of places to go. They like places that are free from traffic or traffic danger and well looked after. We don't need to keep on asking these basic questions. I think the time has come for us to start delivering on what they're asking us and involve children more appropriately in some of the detail, but not keep on thinking we have to reinvent the basics because we know the basics.
That's amazing. Thank you. I think it's been a really fantastic session. I've learned loads, and just to end in terms of action and courage, I think it is a really good point to end on. So I just like to thank Tim, Ines, Simeon and Yoni for joining us today. We've really enjoyed speaking to you all, and thank everyone in the audience for joining us as well. Thank you, everyone. Bye.